Well, Roger, it looks pretty good. They're close.
Yeah, I want to tweak it a little bit. You know,
Three questions, but close.
that's what I came tonight for, to answer questions. So.
I have just a couple of background questions.
It's well rested, doesn't it?
Will, what's he doing over there? Looks like he's playing kids.
In Arizona?
No, he's in Baltimore. That's the
Why not? Just kidding.
If you're talking to me, I'm calling in for wisdom.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to know what
Okay.
stocks to invest in, please.
Yeah.
Actually,
A couple of Russian petroleum companies, right?
Yeah.
Just buy net gas, you'll be all right.
Finance committee people, you're live.
Or if we start.
Okay. Anybody else?
I don't know.
Dick or John or?
Dick's on there, Steve Northridge is on there, and then somebody's on their cell phone that I can't tell who. it
Is
is.
John on there? Hey, Dick.
Oh,
Can you hear
man.
us?
I can hear you fine, yeah.
It's about to pour from the heavens
Again.
again.
Right.
So the purpose was after the last official meeting with the board, and then everybody went home to do some homework. I did some thinking about some things that I thought about after listening to what went on and thinking about everything. And I know one of the things that I personally thought about was how we use apartment rent fees. Or how we book it. So just sort of getting to the background, one thing that was corrected in the document, right, was how we use apartment rent fees. And I thought because of the size of the fee, the size of the number of apartments, and it is recorded as revenue initially against all the recreation expenses that the allocation is done out of. Then what happens is, I take a different view, then the board decides in my mind every year, oh, how much of that rec fee is going to be removed from the operating fund and transferred to the capital improvement fund, as opposed to the other way around. I think of it, if we do an allocation of cost, it is revenue in the operating fund. Then we decide where we're going to stay there against those expenses or transfer to capital. Now, here in the past, it's been done 100% transfer. I think, given all the circumstances of inflation and everything else, and the size of number of apartment doors, that we should put at least half of it as revenue in the operating fund. And slow down the amount because we have a pretty sizable capital improvement fund. Now, it would be more helpful if we, of all the projects, the 2 or 3 projects we're dreaming about, that we actually had more concrete answers on how much a good bill would charge us for each one of them. It would be helpful to say, do we have enough or are we short? Right?
Right.
And I can't answer that because that answer isn't available.
Right, the only new information, and it's still evolving, is this building is dropping pretty significantly, at least in the short term. There's stuff that will need to be replaced, but not this year, not next year.
Like air conditioning.
Air conditioning, the company that manages it here for Grand Manners feels that with proper care, it's got 10 years in it. So we don't need to do it this year. Now, whether that's 5 years, it's not this year, it's not next year, which with capital planning is really the significant thing. We know it's structurally sound, there's steel in the building and all that kind of stuff. The building envelope looks good. There's some questions. Certainly, Lauren's got a leak problem, which is
Firstly, in our office,
You didn't know that?
Well, you were saying that, I knew that that was the answer.
Yeah, well, the cheap method is put a desk on bricks and get a Wellington boot, Welly boots, but, this needs some landscaping out there, some other ideas. I've met with Brian Maintenance, and he has some,
Do we still need windows, another usual big thing?
the windows didn't show up on that kind of lightweight report we got.
Hmm.
Again, I looked at the windows. I think we know what the leak problem is. And I think maintenance has invested, I don't know, half a day for somebody and $20 worth of caulk. And we may be good for a while. Because it doesn't show up on the physical needs assessment, reserve studies. It's not in the short term. So that needs some checking because it's leaks in some of the offices. Definitely there's leaks. It's deteriorating in here when you lift up the blinds, but it's all along the bottom, and maybe we've got the problem solved. And again, it's a short-term problem. The electrical, I don't have a good answer on yet, but it's shrinking. Tom Hall has looked at it. He and I talked about it a couple of times. It doesn't appear to be a big number, and it's not electrical in the lighting and outlet electrical. It's
Or
if
the
any,
amount of power capacity, is that an issue?
only if we do upgrades to the building, which would be normal and typical.
Yes.
No, it's, we might have some costs related to communication stuff that might need upgrades and things.
We did discover a new electrical issue with one of the lights above the front counter caught on fire a couple weeks ago.
About which counter?
The front counter up here in the where the ladies help the
Why did
residents.
it catch on fire?
We're not sure yet. We're still trying to figure that out.
It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
I'd be looking for a squirrel myself, but just,
My only question for you, only because I got a building tour a few months ago, when I walked through the building,
which point, this point?
this building, and I saw the air conditioning unit, I was amazed what it looked like, looked like from the Stone Age. And I was just wondering, my only question to you would be, is newer air conditioning system, is the technology better, or the system's better than that? And are we spending more money, lots of money on electricity because it's older? That's my only, and I don't know, I'm just asking.
Well, yeah, I mean, I replaced the air conditioning system for my home,
Right,
which the developer put there.
right.
And it ran out despite maintenance, it ran out pretty much what he said it would, so that's not unexpected. So what I did was I got a split system with a variable speed motor, and it's
I
much
have
more
that too.
energy efficient.
Right.
So I definitely started saving energy.
I'm asking the same in that.
It's
Question.
possible, but we don't know. And whether it's worth the price of replacing it and whether there's something for her to do significant modifications in this building, that would be a discussion as to how much, it's really a
And maybe
payback.
you would do
It's a
it,
payback issue.
right, and maybe you would do it if we said, oh, we're gonna expand this joint, put a wing on it, then you might do it as part of that upgrade.
Probably not.
Really?
If we were gonna put a wing on it, it almost can make an argument to give it its own, the building
It's a separate unit.
own unit that's cheaper. Also because it gives us the flexibility. If we have more, we put the offices in the back building, they're gonna be on a different time frame than perhaps community stuff here. We just shut down some of it, because they're not gonna be here in the evenings, they're not gonna be here on weekends, that kind of stuff. So it's all possible that, yeah, we might replace it as part of the bigger project. But I always lean on payback. It cost me this much to do it. How many years is it going to take me on energy savings to get my money back to justify doing it in the first place? Like, windows are great, but you never get a payback on windows. Less than like that. Yeah.
Brian has a comment online.
So. Brian?
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Okay, just so you know, we had done quite a bit of research on this a year or two ago. I don't have access to my email anymore, but you can't, the Parks and Recs fee is actually set by statute passed by the board a while back, which is why we've never really went after it, because the board would have to redo a bunch of stuff and everything like that. So the way to get more money, if you want to get more money, is through the capital improvement funds, which is why when we initially did the budget approach, we had come up with that suggestion. I understand your thought process on the Parks and Recs, but that's pretty much sunk in stone without getting board stuff completely redone. Just so you know.
Well, and officially, if it hasn't been announced, I was voted treasurer.
I figured you were.
So to Brian's point that it's going to be hard to undo the apartment fee situation in the near term. But obviously, we can take out all the capital fund and move those apartment fees in. They're all part of the total capital. So call it Ted or Fred. We're just going to move some money. And right now, some people are talking about, at least what Roger put together, 50% of the apartment fees that are budgeted for next year would move into the operating fund instead of.
Could do it that way, the way you
You
just.
just would pull capital, you pull that amount of capital out, 284,000 or whatever it is.
Yeah, so if you
You
can't
get
do
it
it the
done.
way I described, you do it the way you just described.
Yeah, it's not a block or anything.
Yeah.
Capital transfer. Board not to approve that transfer.
So that'd be an annual event.
Yeah, until you set something else in place as a process.
Well, that
Or
would
you
might be
could do it
every
in
budget,
one
every budget
resolution.
process, you could decide, I mean, to Matt's point, if you decide you're gonna put on an addition or fix up Lakeside, maybe, maybe that 50% becomes only 25% of it, in terms of the capital, in terms of what the capital capital improvement need might be for a particular year if you're targeting something. I mean,
And there's,
So,
This is-
regarding this fee issue, I understand it, what I was looking for, in the, revenue and cost P&L is how much is, 50% of the fees amount to? And where did that actually appear in the, P&L? Because it's not obvious to me anyway, where that 50% is, because we were told that the budget presented or sent to us includes 50% of these fees. How much is that and where is it?
I can tell you, have you got your budget open?
Yeah,
Go up to the far right, the proposed budget for 2023.
on the Crow budget.
Yes, correct.
Okay, yeah,
And then go down to the line 20, capital improvement allocation. Highlight that box, $805,000, highlight that box.
yeah,
Look at the formula then. You can see it's 50% of line 15, which is the capital improvement or the apartment rec fees.
okay,
So line 15 times 50% plus line 17 and 18, that gives you the 805. Now, my
Alright.
question, Roger, here is, I think you're missing the contra with the 805,000 there. Because the revenue doesn't add. It doesn't work with the variance. So you see where I just was talking about? Look at fiscal year 2022. So the 839, see that one there? Yeah, and you got a negative or positive. So you're taking that revenue out to put it someplace else, but you've got to have a contra asset. You've got to have an offset because you can't have a general reduction of revenue. So 805 is missing there. It comes up pretty close then when you do the calculation, but it's not quite there. So there's some other little nuance in there, but I think you need an 805 positive in there. That line right above it in 19. You see the format that's been used previously. Don could probably answer that question too. I think it's called a contra asset. That gets you real close to the numbers within a $20,000 or $30,000 that are at the bottom of that line. And it caught my eye because our revenue was being reported as lower than the previous year. And it just doesn't pass the smell test. Our revenue can't be lower than the previous year. we're saying we're gonna have $7,076,000. And previous year was $7,189,000. So with the growth and fee increase and new lots and all that, our revenue, I went through the lines, it just can't be lower.
Yep, you're right, I need to fix that formula.
And it shows then that the variance is picking it up a little bit better. The variance shows 725 over the projected. It's not entirely accurate. You just got to pick through it. I don't want to take all the time to pick through it, but I saw that big error there, so. So Dick, that was an answer to your question where the fees come up in that revenue line. We're only reporting,
Yep, so
50.
So we're counting on about $212,000, which is about 50% of that amount.
It's more than that. It's about $284,000.
Right, you just take
Half of the 496 or whatever it was.
569.
569, I think.
Okay, yeah, I'm looking at the wrong. Yeah.
And a lot of columns there to look at.
Yep. Yeah, that answers it. And then, I don't know if this is the right time for this question or not, but where did we finally land in terms of the shortfall this year? Is that the 378 on line 331, or is there a different number?
No, that's it, I think. That's what I remember. I'm gonna go scroll down to it now. Take me a minute to get there, but I think it's almost $400,000 now.
Right, yeah, that's the 378. So,
When I send the new spreadsheet out, I also created a cash flow projection through year end. So you can see cash.
Good. But is 378 a good number?
Huh?
Is the
It's
378?
very close, like he said, it's close. Yeah.
Okay.
Roger, how much non-cash expense is there? I was gonna go through the P&L and look, but what's the cash, how much difference is there between the cash flow and the reported income?
I mean, I'll find it.
We don't have to dig it out right now, but I was just curious. I was gonna look at that for cash flow purposes too, and I did. Got 378,506. We can't have that much, with no amortization, a little bit of depreciation. I was assuming this was a pretty good representation of a cash flow statement. A lot of variance, but I don't know what through it. So I think we're close if you fix up that revenue thing and get that, organized. It looks pretty good. Then there's that decision on it's called the capital transfer.
Right, if you can't do it the direct way.
I'm curious though, because I said to Lauren, I saw my note, the board seemed to be very reluctant to offset something by moving some capital in the meeting the other night. And it's 34,000 to begin with, and then Ariel's number was 80 some, I think. And they're balking at doing anything. They just wanted the real numbers to go through. I don't know where their heads will be now. And maybe, Bill, you've had some discussion.
Had any discussions? I would personally want to be convinced, and I have an email, which I guess we all got from Jackson, saying that moving the apartment recreation fee to capital offset, says he thinks it's a bad precedent and reduces our primary source of capital funding for the future. I agree with that in concept, but I'd like to see what other choices are then. If we don't do that, what are we left with?
Let me play the other side, but I'll play the other side of that. You're running an operation with an accounting system where you're reporting revenue in one place and you're reporting expenses in another place. That's a real FUPA. So you've got the expenses burdened in the operating P&L, and the revenue that should be supporting them for the use of those people under the theory and everything else, the apartment dwellers, is in another place. That's called the matching principle in accounting. These guys could tell you more.
Right.
Matt could tell you about it more than I could, but it's a real FUPA.
So I personally think the board needs to first fix whatever board resolutions and do it the opposite way, the way I described it. It's revenue, and every year make a conscious decision. Do I need to fund capital improvement funds more? Yes or no? And you do that once a year, and you decide what the facts are based on real knowing for budget projects that are going to be agreed to by everybody. And then you have to make an educated decision based on what we're going to actually do work-wise and use capital improvements. So it's something new. It's a pickleball court. It's a new performing arts center of some kind, in addition to this building. And you fund, you know what it's going to cost. You fund it and you say, gee, are we short? We're going to borrow money. We're going to use all this capital money. But that's the decision you make. And then the cost that's already in the operating expense for the salaries and other costs that go to that allocation should stay, the revenue and the expense should stay in the same place. And then you transfer money the opposite way, not, oh, we're going to leave all the expenses the operating, burden the homeowners, in my opinion, rightly or wrongly, with all of the expenses. And then, because you're moving 100% of the revenue to the capital improvement fund. No, I think you should decide based on my actual uses of capital, you decide where you need it. Is it going to stay as revenue, or are you going to move it to the capital improvement fund for a later date? I just think it has to be fixed.
Well,
Yeah, in
if I
concept,
may,
in concept, regardless of how we fix it procedurally, as Mike said, it's really just a simple matching issue. You know, revenues and costs should be, matched in the same place. Nonetheless, I can understand concern about using capital funds kind of on and off to cover operating costs. So I still think we need a policy on that kind of issue, and perhaps by restricting at this point, the maximum amount that would be used to cover costs would be 50% of the rec fees, provides both some money into the capital funds and some money to cover the rec costs. And that might be.
And that was just a placeholder, Dick,
Yeah, right. That could be a temporary thing until we sort out the bigger issue and give Jackson some confidence that there will still be money coming in to the capital fund.
Because the capital fund is a lot of money over 30 years. It's huge. 130
Well,
million.
Yeah.
That's a large number.
I'll look
30
forward to seeing the
over
day
30
of
years.
that
But
31.
inflation adjustment for that.
Well,
It's probably only 13 million.
it's over.
10 million in
It's
today's
overinflated at the moment because it's the way the formula works, and the only way they would do it for us is it's 9% for 30 years. But the reality is, hopefully we get another bite in 3 years, and we reduce that 9% to the traditional 3.5%, which is pretty much industry practice, or 5% of something. So it's a little more inflated than it needs to be. It's still a lot of money. The spending side is on the capital is disassociated from other things because, we got all these numbers and, that's for all the items that Crowley manages directly. But in the short term, just considerable amount of wiggle room because we can in fact take something like the air conditioning, push it out 5 years if we like that, 10 years if we want to take the really aggressive approach.
Right, assume it doesn't
So
blow
we
up along
spend
the
it
way, right?
as spending decisions and maybe, that's just an option that comes along the way is to,
Right,
in the short term, what our actual need is.
and that's out of the legal reserves, not the capital improvement, because that's your wiggle room. fund.
Right, and personally, this is only the second 30-year one I've ever seen. And the other one I did myself when I was contracting to Harvard, they wanted 30 years. And really what it's just an automatic thing, multiplying at that point. If it gets replaced every 10 years, it's just doing some multiplying.
It's math.
Yes, it's certainly not useful after 20 years. 10 years is shorter, obviously, because you can have a better view of 10 years than 20. But as far as the spending side, it's not, this is just a guide. It's in any particular year. And if we could, in fact, go through an exercise, getting close to the end of the year, well, this is holding up better, we don't need to do it. Or this is sinking quickly, we need to do it now. So there is wiggle room on the actual spending side of the reserve. Because the point is not to get shortchanged and stand flat-footed, as far as the dreaded, special assessment in a particular year, that we got enough money
Right,
at all times. That's
right.
But that actual what we need, there's a lot of flexibility in that number in any short-term period.
So you're saying in actuality that we're more comfortable than less with where we are reserves and things that need to even be done in this building and any other, and we don't know what pickleball will cost us. We got a
No.
bid that, we don't really know what that would cost from a good building.
There's been a lot of things bantered about in terms of projects. I think the board should take a look at what the outlook is for the next 3 or 4 years for capital needs and have some kind of picture of that. That would help to dictate a little bit more how much you wanted to pull on the capital.
Right.
You know, some kind of a 5-year capital plan. Look what the plan is, how is it going to fund, and how much like a replacement reserve, how much is going to be available then potentially over and above what your needs might be. Because our capital cycle is going to continue to go down. I mean, there isn't that many things we can do with new capital.
Right.
We're running out of land, we're running out of places, we're running out of options. So it's not like it's a, increasing curve. But the board should sit down or get some people to sit down and think about, what do the next 5 years look like with capital?
No, I think it's a good idea.
Well, just along those ways, I mean, obviously the addition.
You're doing business all the time. You have to.
It's already being looked at, I think, in terms of, what would it cost to do an addition here or maybe fix up Lakeside, kind of the wish list type of things.
And come to some agreement, what we're really, where you're headed and what it really would cost. So that way you could back into how much money you really need to hold back in capital improvement fund. Right? And how much wiggle room you have for kicking some of the can down in the legal reserve fund to when you really will spend money there.
You figure out what you think you're going to spend in the next 5 years, then you double it, you'll be pretty close.
Right.
Instead of next year, I mean, we're using 50%. I don't know, maybe it's 40%. I mean, I think at 50%, according to the numbers or whatnot, I mean, works out somewhere between 60 or 65.
Roger, was there any,
I guess a rooftop.
yeah, was there any magic to when you picked the 50% for the apartment, moving the apartment fees?
It was, no magic. It just was something I heard that there might be an
It
agreement
came
on.
up in the meeting, somebody said 50%.
I said 50.
Yeah, it was based on a
all
couple of
your fault.
conversations I had
It
with
is.
people, so I said,
It is my
let's start there just as a
I just said,
starting
let's
point for
place all that.
See,
conversation.
the disconnect for
Half
me,
in, half out. That's kind of what I figured. And we discussed it.
the disconnect for me is the board wasn't interested in even doing $34,000 or $80,000. And now we're talking about $280,000. I mean, that's a disconnect for me. I don't follow the logic.
But I think also
The
that,
board's talking, I think the problem was the board's talking about taking fully out of CapEx, but they were a little bit, some of them were more interested in readjusting the allocation of apartment rec fees to offset expenses. I know it's coming from the same bucket, so it's a
Ted or
little
Fred,
bit,
yeah.
Right.
it's a little bit disingenuous in a different argument, but I think that's what
Okay.
the other
That's all I
board
got
members
there.
are
In spite of what
from what I
resolution,
understand.
right, Lauren, in spite of what resolution passed, I'm really hung up that we have all those expenses to go to calculate the apartment fee, but they don't get any revenue against them. 100% of the revenue they're in the operating statement, get no revenue support. All that money by a resolution, not a law in the state of Florida, go to the capital fund. That just doesn't sit well with me at
Well,
all.
it does burden the resident.
I
And
don't
it
think
does
it's
cause a
appropriate.
resident to pay a disproportionate share, I guess, to the capital fund or wherever. As opposed to.
Your recreation operations, basically.
And I think there's also some thinking in people's minds last time we all met that we might be able to generate more money out of apartment fees by changing the calculation.
Well, my question there, Bill,
But I think that was
Higher
in,
power.
Right.
Good luck with that.
that's what Cindy was
You
saying.
can't change the calculation without a full agreement from the apartment complexes and an amendment to the supplement as it exists now.
And
The
Lauren,
calculation
right.
is set.
Yeah,
Lauren, my question there is also from, who has the power there. Some of the new apartments on the boulevard, they have pools and gyms. So that's not gonna really go over well when you say, oh, by the way, we would increase your fee. But they've built in some of those complexes, some big number of units, and they have quite a nice array of amenities. So you're gonna get pushback from those folks. They could increase.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah, potentially. I don't know any of that, but I'm just guessing. I would.
I mean, there are other things other than pools or whatnot, but yeah.
So what else do we need to do with the budget at this point?
Wait until the rain stops.
We've got
I
an
think if you don't have any other additional glaring issues that you guys saw with the spreadsheet, I think those fixes, Roger, take another crack at it, send
Okay.
it out again on Monday,
When is the actual next official meeting?
Tuesday at 12.
I
Okay,
think it should,
The committee will get another revision of this over the weekend.
great. That was, the whole purpose of talking, and I came up with that idea, was really just talking, check the spreadsheets. So we didn't have another meeting, oh, it's finding all the errors in the
I think
meeting
Brian
of the
has a
board.
comment.
Brian?
Brian, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I got a few different comments if I can, please. So let's go to replacement reserves first. You were talking about them. The reason we chose 8.5% for 3 years was to be conservative. And Bill, just for clarity with you, we were trying really to protect the board because you'd run into the problem that if you don't book a number that you feel is appropriate for the way the expenses are getting done now, then if you have to do an assessment later or increase rates a lot, somebody could actually come back and say, okay, I want to go against the board because they didn't charge a proper rate based upon inflation as they knew it existed. So that's where the 8.5% came in. I 100% get that you defer activities, but you need to fund them when you think you're going to need the funding, even when you spend it later. So that was the thought process there. And if inflation goes down, well, we're going to do a reserve study again in 3 years anyway. When we did this, there was a thought maybe inflation was going to go down fast, and that one now even seems to be escaping a little. So that was considered prudent. Going to the apartment rec fees, I don't think you can get rid of any of that without making all the changes we talked about. And again, if you turn on my stuff, I can send you guys emails. But so that way I wouldn't go there. I'd go after the capital. I understand Matt's argument about the revenues, but that was built from the perspective that it needed to create funds because to raise debt, we've got to go for a vote of all residents, which just is not going to happen. Get a positive vote. So that was the thought process there. The one comment you have made, I haven't seen any of your models, obviously, but the one comment you have made that surprised me is if you were allocating half of 550,000, say 275, 280, when we needed 34 before, have you increased expenses by $250,000 to create that need? It's just a question.
No, the increase now, Brian, would be that full amount put across would be 8.56. So the increase to the residents has come down from the 16.
Okay, so you've reduced the increase to 13% or some number like that.
It's 8.5.
8.5. Okay, gotcha.
That's where it sits right now.
So let me
I know,
ask.
Yeah, yeah, so it's like a
So let me ask the-
$5+
It'll land
reduction.
a little bit higher.
Okay, so let's for the
It's
sake
gonna move up a little bit.
for the sake of argument, let's just say it's 9% increase in fees, and you're going to take 280,000 out of capital since it's not going to be rec. Is this because you, so the question you're going to have to answer, I think, as a finance committee and ultimately as a board, is this something that is going to become a repeating pattern where you're going to take capital improvement funds to zero, using them to subsidize operating expenses? Or do you think this is a one-time blip in expenses that's going to go away? And that was the thing that worried me a lot. When it was $34,000, I really didn't care. It was not a material number. At $280,000, it's a material number. And does that mean that you're charging less this year and then automatically thinking you're going to increase by 280,000 next year plus inflation? You don't have to answer me right now. I'm just saying that I've already seen on the porches, which I got back on and stuff like that, that question coming up. And I think that's one you need to be prepared to at least think about.
But aren't we actually talking about a lot more than 284,000? Because we're also talking about 370 this year. So in total, I'm talking about 700,000 of use of the capital investment fund, and which kind of magnifies the same issue that you raised, Brian, which is this, are we done with this one-time set of uses? Or is this an ongoing issue that will carry on into, next year?
If you take 375,000 and divide it by 4,500, that's $85 a household.
Yeah, Brian, I'll share a thought with you that I have, not that it's right or wrong or anything. When the decision was made to do this back in 2013 or 14, I think the organization had just gotten the land, the golf course, or the Disney and the whole thing, and they're thinking about the fields and everything else. So the trajectory on our capital spend was going to be strong. I talked to Tom Tucson about this, and he said, "Yeah, we're trying to find money anyplace." And so they did the apartments, and then they changed that one-time fee when the home is sold to the full annual dues. It was only $300 or $400 before that. So I think you can look at this potentially and say that the slope of the curve on our capital spend is going to be going down. So I don't know that we have to keep filling the coffers as fully, but that's where we need a 5-year capital plan. What's going to be the potential outlays? How does that match with the inflows that we have? Is there room to back off of that and move some of this money back to support the operating fund? That's a study that needs to be done. We're all just shooting from the hip right now. The logic would say that there probably is going to be some flexibility.
My argument then would be, and like if I end up at a board meeting, I'll make this argument that you should probably then eliminate the apartment rec fee entirely as a contribution to capital funds. Call it operating, it's a revenue line, because Matt said it's not booked as revenue, but it's booked as revenue, and then the contra revenue removes it. So get rid of the contra revenue for those items, and if you go with a planned profit this year in your budget for 223, that's okay, because you've got an absolute loss that you're going to occur in 2022. We all know that. So you could be refilling the coffer a little. And that would be my argument then.
Yeah, and just one more point on these, the use of capital funds. It's actually not our charge to recommend to the board how much or not to use for capital investment. I think it would make sense to offer the board two options with a range between them. One option is, okay, don't use any of the capital investment funds. Here's the budget impact. Here's the assessments, and if you want to go that way, you do it, and you can keep all the capital investment. The other thing you could do is, cover the shortfall this year, do the 50% thing on the rec fees, in which case the HOA impact is this amount. It's really the board's decision, I think, to decide where in that range of options they want to be, and we could recommend a preference for one of those two extremes, but it's really the board that will decide whether and how they want to do that.
Brian?
If I could make a comment, I think it's a dangerous place to go where we're going to use 50% of the rec fee one year and 75 another year and 25 another year. It becomes like a slush fund. That I think that's just dangerous. So if you want to get rid of the rec fee, get rid of it entirely. Budget for a profit in 2023. You have a loss in 2022. You're going to do a refill, and then you move forward. And you got a lot of capital funds because Island Village is selling homes. That's going to lever down in the future too.
And I guess the only thing Brian, we all don't know is really how as if the economy sinks into a recession, what will actually happen with their own the sales of homes, section 2, 3, 4, etc. We don't know, right? That could also happen if we continue to slide into further recession in this country. There are a lot of economists that are concerned about that.
Yeah.
You know,
But that
first,
kind
I
of
guess the
gives-
first thing to test is Manatee actually going to be building that bridge to section 2, or they're going to say, maybe we're going to wait a year before we build that bridge.
Yeah, I don't want to count too much on their money. 'Cause
No, I don't want to count.
I'm
Right.
not gonna worry too much
And,
about that.
and we haven't forgotten, but the other problem we're not allowed to talk about, how's that gonna work out? And you know, and what the impact that be to the budget. The board has to figure that out, what stance they're gonna take, you know, I don't know what my opinion is.
Right, the whole Iron Village issue is another one the board needs to weigh in on, because we're counting on revenues. Surely there will be costs in 2023. We're not putting in for costs. You know, we're kind of building into the budget an almost sure cost that's there.
Well, the 300 apartments seems pretty sure that they're going to be there, and they're going to be occupied. I don't have complete confidence in the other homes in any estimates we get from anybody.
Well, my concern is that this will go into the board, and Jackson's already taken his position and sent it to you guys apparently. We didn't see it, but that's a position he's taken. And it'll just be an emotional decision, and it won't be fact-based. And I would encourage us to think about what capital needs we have, what does that look like, how do we need to and make a more informed decision about, can we take something, should we take something, does it make sense to take something? But to have a emotional conversation where everybody has an opinion, and then the majority rules, I'd like to see some facts to back it up.
And that's why I brought this up, to start a healthy, legitimate conversation with that, as opposed to just arguing who has the most votes, what is the real answer, what is the right, good answer.
Well, Brian makes a good point, you know, people could just rate it every year. I mean, you've got
And
to
that
have,
wasn't my
you
intention.
gotta have some guideposts that say, this is what our plan is over this period of
And
time,
I don't.
not a year-to-year type thing.
And I'm highly
Okay, I said
sensitive
everything
to
else.
read the fund thing because the legislature has been reading.
That's kind of common sense.
We want to use for our projects.
It's what you plan anyway.
Right. I kind of looked at it as revenue and not, and I would have done it the opposite way.
It is a precedent.
Yeah, really.
1 year is one thing, but it's like, becomes addictive.
Right, and I guess the answer is, you know, to go to the residents and say we're gonna raise to 16%, are we really at that point, you know?
Or are we just kicking the ball?
I don't want to kick any ball where if we know we have to, you know, have a problem,
Roger,
then we need to.
and so talking, a couple things. These little addendums you had, that little charts where the increases were coming from and so on. Whenever you do that, use the projected, not the budget from the previous year. When it's increasing over what the projected is.
So I had a request for the budget. How about I just add another column to the projected?
Obviously, we're gonna have to narrow down these columns. You can't send this whole thing out.
Well, I'll just do projected. That probably makes more sense.
It makes a lot more sense because the
Right.
budget was something that was done before the year started. And it's got no relevance when we're all the way through the year. So the projection's got a lot more relevance.
Projected.
So I think the only budget, the thing we should mail to the residents, the only thing it should say budget on is the 2023 year. I mean, everything else should be projected or historical actuals. There shouldn't be any more budgets. They're gone.
I had a question on a slightly different topic. We've got these spreadsheets on the service areas. Are those the ones we should be relying on, or will it be something else?
I have an updated one that I'll get out to everybody.
Do we need to talk about the investments, which it was kind of brought up, and, you know, Brian sent out an email, which I think makes a lot of sense in terms of, you know, I think the board, you know, with rates obviously ticking up, I mean, you know, obviously makes some sense to take, you know, some of that cash and, you know, buy T-bills or do something with it, but, you know,
Let's have Don give us a recap of what we currently have. 'Cause I have no idea what we're currently sitting in, where it's invested. Can we get Don to do that? And then we'll go from there.
Do you want to schedule a meeting with Don, or do you want him to just send you an email recap?
Email recap would be good for us to see probably to start with. Let's get it in our hands sooner.
You saw Brian's email, it sounds right.
Brian's
Brian.
comment.
All right, so let me help you here. Unless something got invested in the last week and a half, it's invested in cash today. So it's not invested anywhere. So that's why so we're not earning anything, which we should blame on the prior treasurer. The new treasurer should immediately get us invested in U.S. Treasuries. I mean, they're paying 3 months now is north of 3%. You know, so if we had a barbell of 3, 6, and 9 or something like that, you can easily invest. I mean, that's the reason I sent something. Well, I sent it in the email the other day. I mean, you could easily invest $1 million and not curtail anything and earn $30,000-$40,000.
But you would layer it based on your cash needs.
Right. So what I'm saying is Don's not going to. Mike's question is perfect, except we're not investing.
Well, then we'll ask him the question and say, if the answer is no, we're not invested in anything, then what would you recommend? And what are you doing currently with other HOAs? Just get a feel from them.
I'm perfectly fine with you doing that, and I'll let you guys make that decision. But if we're going to end up thinking for 3 months, I'd buy a U.S. Treasury for 3 months and earn the 3% at least.
Oh, yeah, I'm not saying we're going to think for 3 months.
I blame myself because I have brought this up to the finance committee and I never pushed it. So it's actually a mistake on my part. I wish I had pushed it more.
Oh, but waiting, I mean, rates did tick up, so it's not the worst thing in the world necessarily.
No, it's ticked up, but it's ticked up now. It's a nice number.
Yep, for
Yes.
sure.
I want to add
real
one
money.
comment. If I can add one comment for you to think about, because we talked earlier about a slush fund, but what you will have is I've seen this, the other side of this, you will get pressure from residents that we should take all the monies and use it to reduce increases to zero because there's a recession coming and stuff like that. So I want to just go with what Mike said, which is any unformulaic approach is going to be in the worst. It's not going to be in the best interest of CROA as a long-term entity, which is why we shouldn't have a fluctuating answer. If people say, I don't need Lot D and I don't need Lakeside, I don't need this, I want the $2.8 million to reduce my fees.
Exactly. So let me, I think I completely agree. So let me ask this question. So when Jackson turns to Bill as treasurer and says, okay, Bill, what did the finance board recommend? Do they recommend this budget we've been talking about today? Do we recommend this as one option? What are we saying as a committee that we want to recommend to the CROA board?
What I'm hearing, or what I'm hearing is that it's the $280,000 answer.
And the 378 from current year. We could, as I said earlier, we can recommend that and say, but if you don't do this, then the HOA will go up, 20%. And this is the impact. I mean, we need to have something written down that we can say represents what the finance committee suggests.
But we've got room in the operating fund. We don't have to replenish the 378. I mean, we've got plenty of slack there, so we can get by without doing that. And I think that number is going to be higher than 378, but we won't. We don't have to replenish that.
Right,
But I
but you
think
still
when
have
you say-
enough operating cash.
Bill, when you say the half the apartment rec fees for a number and it comes out of capital as opposed to the apartment fees, it comes out of the capital fund because we can't change it otherwise. You understand that? You heard that before. I think along with that, the next part of the statement has to be, this is a one-time thing that we want to do here. We need some formulation that we can look at what our projected capital spends are gonna be over the next 5 years, and what our rate of replenishment of that capital fund will be, and make sure we have harmony between our needs and our wants, and our abilities, and our capacity.
And whatever we're producing for the owners, I understand that, and I think everybody in the room understands the percentages, but I think it needs to be in real dollars, because 9%, 16%, I think scares people who don't work with numbers all the time. And we also have a cover sheet that says this is what it equates to per family. I think will be helpful for hopefully relieving stress on some people, and also for just for simple clarity.
Well, I mean, I think what we've talked about is if you do nothing with the capital improvement fund, right? I mean, it's gonna go up like 16%.
Right.
16.1, I think, is the number, which I think, look, no one's happy with it, but I think, the reality of today is everyone, realizes that costs are going up rather dramatically and all that.
Right.
So, from that standpoint,
I'm scared already, but what's that in dollars?
well, it's gonna be, 100 and, was it 172 or 4?
I think it was something like that.
Yeah.
It was $14.35 a month, wasn't it?
No, not all, a month.
What is it a month?
No, it's like $17 or $19 a month.
Was it?
Well, the 285 or whatever it is, 284 is about $62 a year in the fee. And right now the fee is $1,067. And with the budget you're seeing here, putting 50% in, it'd be $1,159 or an 8.5% increase. If we rolled it back out, it'd go up to $1,221.65. Up another $62. Those are the numbers. I know it's going to move by $10 or $20 because of a couple of changes they have to make, but that's rough and tumble. That's what it is in dollars. That's our Roger's chart. I just put the other numbers in.
And I personally don't feel, what is the affordability of a 16% increase on the greater group of residents? Probably, to me personally, it means nothing as long as we're spending it on the right things.
Right, well, I mean, I'm used to outrageous condo fees that I've seen in my life. My mother-in-law had a condo here in town, and it was $550 a month, and that was 4 years ago. So,
We're nowhere near any of that.
right. I've always looked at the actual fees, and I think, really, for what we get, we're pretty reasonable. I mean, there's 50 parks, and there's a whole city, and people are pretty responsive. I know if I called City Hall, most of the places I live, nobody even picks up the phone, and they don't care if I got a pothole. And, but here, it's maybe bumpy and rough sometimes, but, I think you get something for your money here. And I don't think it's a lot of money.
No one is suggesting we don't.
Yeah.
But
I think some people will think that they should get it cheaper.
I just wanted to have a conversation. This is the way we're handling and processing everything. Does it make sense in this environment? That's all.
Bring it up to the board, I guess, to decide what is that number? What does that look like? I mean,
I'm okay with doing nothing and doing the 16% this year, because we already set the bar in the world at large that the bar is going to be coming in high, right?
but the guardrails have to be set because,
Right.
they're rated every year for big amounts and whatnot.
Well, boards change, people change,
Yeah,
people
exactly.
get emotional. We need some guardrails.
Absolutely.
Roger, do you need anything else from us?
Hugely important, for sure.
Okay. Got it. What you need?
I see the gentleman on the right, our right anyway.
Ryan,
He's either a Boy Scout or he always raised his hand.
I'm a quiet member of the audience. One last question before we finalize the budget. We had originally, Lauren, $40,000 of revenue coming from CCS. Did you guys lower that?
No, I left it there.
Okay, for the finance committee, I think that number's too high. And the reason I say that is CCS funds can only be used for things that benefit the community as a whole. And unless you have a huge fireworks or something like that in there, you're not going to be able to access that much in CCS funds. So I think you've got a correction there.
What if we have a beer party?
If you got, well, you got to spend the money first. So if you tell me you got a beer party budgeted in there for big bucks, then fine, you can reimburse those bucks. But what I'm trying to,
say police patrol to
Well, I
keep
can
the
say the
sanity on the roads.
$40,000 was to address Pups and Pints, Founder's Day, 4th of July, and what was Falltoberfest. So 4 different events that are traditionally both community and Crow resident owned, kind of a combined thing. So that's why we just did a $40,000, approximately
Should be able to
$10,000
use
across
it
the
up.
board. So if you want us to lower it, I'm happy to lower it. It was just one of those, that was the thought process based on previous expenditures.
and using just the 4th of July as an example for the Finance Committee and Grand Manor's benefit. In the past, we never reimbursed expense for parade because it was, I agree, the community in theory could come to it, but the community doesn't really come to it. And it really was getting mighty fine to the line of what a 501c should be used for. Because we'd actually went over some of this with Tom Slayton even. So that was my nervousness on the 4th of July, unless you're having a fireworks event. If you look at the November event, unless we're doing something with fireworks or something where we're drawing in a lot of people like Founder's Day from the community, that's really a resident thing. We can't reimburse expenses for a resident thing. Pups and Pints is really, well, it's always been expensed out of CCS originally anyway, so you can't reimburse it because the direct expense I don't think was in CROA. So that is the struggle I'm having with that number.
Okay, good. The Pups and Pints expenditures are existing COA now, so we can pull those and put them in CCS.
I'm happy reimbursing.
It's a zero-sum game. For the budget, it's a zero-sum game. You either have the expenses to back it up, and you got the revenue from there, whatever the number is, it doesn't matter, it's zero-sum. So if you don't have enough to cover it, then change
Do we
it up.
spend any money on controlling the badness?
So it's got a zero impact on the bottom line.
Yes. All of those.
But from CROA perspective, it's not zero.
What is it?
Well,
If-
some of. Go ahead, Brian.
No, I mean,
We pay
if you're spending the money in CROA and you can't get the reimbursement from CCS legally, then it drops to the bottom line. And right now, that 40,000 of income is in the CROA budget. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
I'll relook at the numbers before.
Where does CCS or whatever it is, where do they get the money from?
They get $20,000 a year from a CJC, and they've just had a collection in the past. And I think after the 4th of July is done, probably, Lauren, they're going to be down around 100,000 in cash, my guess.
That's,
Okay, so we're not funding it.
We're only funding that we go through CJC. That's all we're doing.
So, are we basically, are we saying at this point that we are going to recommend the budget we've been looking at today with the couple of adjustments with the 50% direct fee? And point out or make that contingent on the use of the rec fees is a one-time thing at this point. It needs a further long-term study of capital needs to continue using that in the future. Is that what we're saying?
Works for me.
I don't know the process. Has somebody on the committee been writing something to the board as to what the recommendation is, or has Brian been doing that?
The committee, I'm sorry, I'll jump in even though I'm not on the committee. The committee would write the president of the committee, hint, hint, would write a letter to the board or an email to the board copying the full finance committee saying, here's our recommendation and here are items that we think need to be addressed in conversation. You'll remember I sent the minutes to the board 10, 15 days ago. So I think Matt needs to say something saying, here's the recommendation, here are the soft items, and then you got this big item of what are you going to do with the 385, 285 rec fees, whatever you want to call it.
right.
Why don't you and Matt work on that together?
Fine.
I think it's comfortable both of you. You're the treasurer sitting on here.
Yeah.
Matt Sharon, you guys write it up.
And-
Circulate it. We take a look at it.
Charles Richards has a comment.
Hey, so if I'm hearing, just so you're recommending 50% of rec fees to operating fund and 280,000 capital transit. So what happens if you do none of the above? What percentage increase then goes to the residents? It just seems like you're kind of delaying the inevitable. And I'm not a finance guy. I mean, I'm listening to this, but it just seems like, right, it has to increase. So why not just take it at face value and just pass it on? I'm just curious, what's the increase if you don't do A, B?
Probably closer to that 16%.
16%.
It's similar to the number that was used at the last problem meeting.
Lost everybody.
Yeah, so I think this letter that Bill and Matt will write should highlight that that's an option too, of not using any of the funds to offset the assessments. And if you do that, the budget will go up 16%, and this is the impact on homeowner fees. So if the board wants to do that, they have the info. If they want to go with this budget we've talked about today, they'll have exactly the same input in terms of assessment impacts. And ultimately, the board will need to decide where they want to be at either of those two extremes or somewhere in the middle. But at least they'll have the facts in front of them.
And if we didn't take any of the transfer, Doug, will the number go, with all the correcting and the spreadsheets?
About 16% increase.
Is that would still work, that would still hold with all
It
the.
didn't go more than 16. Yeah.
But it won't go more than 16. That's what I was. So we have a 16 answer or something
For a
less than
9%.
that, what?
For a 9%.
Or a 9%
If you
increase.
use the
And
50,
those are really the two options, basically.
basically, if you use the 50%, you're gonna be running next year's budget on a, basically a profit, but you could also say, given the deficit for this year that we're gonna run, which is probably somewhere between,
$500,000.
let's call it $500,000.
Right.
Okay. That those funds essentially are helping to offset that, in
Right.
those terms of, so people don't get too crazy.
That was my original thought.
Yeah.
Board decision.
Without knowing all of the prior proclamations.
I can make a decision for this year, but to make a decision.
Just looking at good economic.
So that's the huge,
The thing we're missing is a study yet.
And you gotta emphasize that in the paper that, like Mike said, is some sort of capital study. What are the capital needs, for.
Right, we don't actually know that.
3 to
All
5
the
years.
projects, everybody's having political views on this building expansion, the theater downtown, Lakeside, and pickleball. We don't even know what those, we
Well,
don't
I
know what
think-
the price tags.
I think pickleball is kind of the ship has sailed a little bit.
No, we just don't know a good solid.
We should be close to or at 100% drawings, which means now we can go out and get some bids on it.
Right, and I'm saying we
And then
just don't
have a
know the
real
number. I'm not saying the project is not wouldn't be done. We're saying is to the point of having concrete numbers, we don't know that answer yet.
Right, this building and any other thing, there's no numbers for.
Right, so it's hard to say what a real need out of capital improvement money we actually have, is all that I'm trying. We should try to. work
And my
harder.
comments on this building are not about improvements or changes. It's
That was a
just,
legal reserve, when we spend money on a legal reserves to restore it to a good state.
right. The reserves are always conceptually going back to what it was in the beginning, not an improvement.
And also.
Can I just ask a quick question? You've had a good discussion about where the recreation fee should be placed. And I happen to agree, from my little knowledge of accounting, that we're doing this backwards, that this is revenue, which the board may decide that that as a rule, 50% or 75% should go into capital. Start there.
That was my point.
Exactly. And I think that's right. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm right, agreeing with you. But I think you need to have that decision as a finance committee and make a recommendation to the board that you recommend either that it remain the way it is, or that you recommend that, to be true to accounting principles, it should be the other way around, where they should come up perhaps with a policy that in any given year, a certain percentage will go to the capital fund if available.
See, if, I like that idea.
If available, and to the contrary, maybe even more will go to the capital fund if there's more available. But it
Right.
shouldn't start there. And then you don't have to be pulling it out. It's part of revenue.
I think we should go through a rewriting process,
So,
just to get it flowing in the right order.
and because I'm not sure, I think the board is probably more like me in terms of understanding accounting, that it's hit or miss. That you need to educate them on that. As a finance committee, that we take the position that it should be one or the other from a mature standpoint. And so that, I don't know, I have no clue what law was passed or what, wasn't a law anyway, but what resolution was passed in 2014. But I know it wasn't done in an educated way with the finance committee because there wasn't one.
Right.
And so you shouldn't be married to whatever decision was made in 2014 if it isn't working today and it isn't even true to accounting principles. So separate and apart from what you're recommending on the budget, I think you either now or soon, you should be getting together with a recommendation for the board to understand where this is. And maybe it's more palatable to them to quote unquote, take money out of capital when they realize they're just doing the opposite, putting less into capital.
I kind of look at it as putting less into capital.
It's just.
Yeah, but Brian was saying there's a whole process that needs to happen. So we might recommend that, but it sounds like there's a lot more to it than that.
There isn't more to it. That's the form that he's talking about, the formula for collecting it from the apartments, not the process of the board allocating any income, which in the charter specifically says the board can allocate any income in any way it chooses. There's no special formula to that. That's a board decision. The formula is about how are you collecting from the apartments, and that.
Right.
That's a different
So,
story.
And the only thing I said to Lauren earlier in the day is that we should just make sure that there are no mistakes in any of the numbers we're using to do that allocation, so that, if someone's salary is included, that it is the right person, the right percentage of their salary, if they do two different tasks. So the cost allocation formula that we're basis number is good, whether we use it one way or another, right? That we should it should be a spreadsheet that really has been tied into payroll records and our other costs to make sure it's accurate.
And it has been, it was updated, but
Good.
Brian has a comment too.
Okay.
Okay, let me recommend a solution that might work. So rather than allocating, I would just recommend consider this. This is what we made the decision last year to take $25,000 out of the operating budget and put it in the capital fund. I'm pretty certain that it's still in there with what Lauren proposed to you. So what we could do is we could say, look, we're going to get rid of the apartment rec fee contra liability so that all the rec fees go into the revenue with no contra liability. And then you increase the $25,000 to say, okay, we're putting a bigger amount into capital so that all residents participate. Then you're honoring what was already put in place. I just don't, at least then, rather than having two places where we have one place. The 25,000 can go to 125 or 150 or 75. I don't care. And then you got one process in place, and that's where the board can kind of make it balanced. But then you take away the apartment rec fee process, other than just getting the revenue thing right.
It seems reasonable.
So I had one other question, somewhat aside from this. Are you going to review the service area budgets at some point? I have seen an early draft of one. I've tried to make sense of my service area. It makes no sense to me. It goes up by about a lot. It goes up by 30% this year. And we had a large capital contribution come back from the roofing litigation that went toward our budget. It's accounted for. For the life of me, I have no idea why this is going up. Residents in my service area, and I'm on the committee, have been asking how in the world can it go up $130 a year?
Roofing allocation, and I was just on the board and
Right?
not intimate with the details. I don't think anybody was made whole with it.
We weren't made whole, but we just got essentially 6 years worth of, 6 to 7 years worth of reserves paid back to us in the litigation. So we can't be behind.
That first draft, or that first draft that you have, I don't know which version of it is.
It's old.
There's a new one as of early this week that I just haven't had a chance to fully sit down and dive into, that will go out to the board, and it addresses some of that, because the drivers right now are reserve contributions in the increases in the service area budgets. So for those of you, and it's mainly impacting those of you who had roofing, we're part of the roofing litigation, so we're addressing that based on the
So
contribution.
it's coming down or going up? because
Going
of
down.
that? Going down. But my second question, and I'm being candid here, is we have gotten something that says management is going to give itself a $26 per door per month increase in our fees. Last year, we had a $5 per door increase. And by the way, we didn't have a service manager for 6 months. So we're paying for something we never got. And now it's going up 5 times that amount. That's a number. I mean, it's 20, so we're talking about give or take $31 to the 130 that I was looking at on the budget. So I was just curious, do you all look at these beyond just saying, well, those numbers match, which, you know, I might understand that too, but, you know, from a standpoint of being on a service committee I never wanted to be on, but I'm on it. I have residents asking me questions about this that I can't answer. I come to finance committee meetings, the hopes of always coming some answer. Do you ever see that, or is that just something that really you just?
Well, we have draft budgets that has been distributed and are going to be redone, so we'll get to see that.
Okay.
Well, I get
It
to
was
see that.
We've not looked
I
at
guess
service
I
area
had
budgets at
seen
all.
them, but I guess I.
We've not looked at service area budgets at all.
What are you
Zero.
saying?
Artisan Park.
Zero. Just Crow and a little bit on CJC, but 99% of our time is spent on
I figured as much, and I was just curious,
You
because
know,
That management fee was discussed at length today by a couple of us.
I say that.
I just know from like Artisan
especially
Park,
for what we get. I mean, we get one person, and we've always had one person, new service area manager. It was now spread thinner than ever before because there's more service areas.
So I wanted to
The fee just
go
keeps
over
going
to
up.
John White.
And, you know, a lot of people are paying for this one person,
Right.
more than we're paying
Because
last year.
you just finished today.
You have an additional body supporting you
You
guys.
just finished.
Yeah, we have one. We have two, but
So what are you looking
there's one service area manager and Natalie jumps.
You're not looking at
No, you have Rosie,
Yeah.
who's
Rose.
the service area
at?
administrator.
Yeah.
So you have two dedicated.
No,
people
no,
for the service
not
areas.
those of
Rose and
condos.
Rosie.
Town.
Oh, and
Oh,
her
okay,
assistant.
sorry.
Okay. I've never seen.
And-
Rose is really nice.
We only have got as unused.
Okay, I was just curious how far this goes. This is a relatively new committee,
It's
isn't
a
it?
big short.
Okay.
3 years.
I mean, it took John was gonna
Usually the
share
rest
it
of
with
the
me.
people. This-
Because it is a big
Appreciate
number.
that.
You get these.
All right, anything else?
I want to see Parkview on them because.
I think
that's the
let's
one
not,
thing only-
let's not lose Brian's suggestion because I think that's a good fix.
Yep.
Did you pick up on that?
You got the front fix, I think. is-
So we can use it, and I think we can still say to the board that once the study's done, we can determine on an annual basis what we want to plug in for additional
Will.
contribution to the capital fund from the operating results. Because we should have a surplus there.
Yeah, be a surplus, but
We'll target
That's a
it.
good idea.
Just one other question. So what is the time frame for of drafting this letter to CROA, and so that we'll all be able to book some time to review it?
Well, to be timely, it needs to be ready for the meeting at noon on Tuesday.
That's the executive session meeting or?
No,
No,
that's a budget.
the next
workshop.
budget meeting.
So get it out. So later on this weekend.
Sunday or Monday.
First thing Monday, we get back to by close.
Monday before noon, maybe, or something like that, you know.
Yeah.
Also put in, that's
I make a motion to
the
adjourn.
money, because that's really top of the front and
You
center.
get fees from every
You made a
sale.
motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Celebration.
All in favor?
Aye.